On today's World Insight, a meeting of minds with leaders of China, Japan, and South Korea. What's on the agenda? And a Hong Kong SAR Legislative Council member talks about his mission to fight for what he thinks is right.
I fight for what is supposed to be correct.
Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. Let's begin today's show with the 8th meeting of the leaders from China, Japan, and South Korea. They have been engaged in regional cooperation for 20 years. On Tuesday, leaders gathered in China's southwestern city of Chengdu, discussing future partnerships and working on common interests. Let's see where they are going to reach this time.
This year marks the 20th anniversary of cooperation among China, Japan, and South Korea. Leaders from the three countries met in Chengdu. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe all highlighted closer regional economic cooperation. Premier Li called for better negotiations towards a free trade agreement among the three and pushed for the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP.
Regarding the ASEAN Plus 3 summit, we've all made our promises to accelerate the establishment of the free trade zone. This action is not only meaningful for the integration and collaboration of our economies, but it also contributes to world peace.
The leaders pledged to work together to oppose trade protectionism and unilateralism and contribute to an open, inclusive world economy. They said efforts would also be made to promote regional connectivity, creating solutions for an aging society, and developing digital technologies.
We have reaffirmed the importance of this trilateral meeting, and we have decided to further promote our collaboration. We have concluded the agreement so as to promote future collaboration, and for those areas closely connected to people's daily lives, we will work together in a closer partnership.
I want to build a new era of the three kingdoms in which we can cooperate and develop together with the international community.
Besides economic cooperation, political trust and security ties are important in maintaining stable relations among the three. Beijing, Tokyo, and Seoul also seek to strengthen cooperation to cope with security risks on the Korean peninsula.
So what's the likely outcome of the trilateral meeting between China, Japan, and South Korea? Let's turn to our panelists. In Tokyo, we invited Katsuhisa Furukawa, a Japanese expert on national security affairs and a former expert on the UN DPRK panel. In Boston, we are joined by Sun-Yong Lee, a Kim Koo Korea Foundation professor of the Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University. And in Beijing, we are joined by Rong Ying, vice president from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Merry Christmas, shall I say, to the three of you, first of all. And now let's go into our discussion about the three countries. First of all, will there be more common ground on geopolitics or more on trade and economics? Mr. Furukawa, would you like to go first, briefly?
Yeah, it is always good to have the meetings among the leaders of the three countries. The most important aspect of this meeting is to establish the personal relationship and trust among the three leaders. We shouldn't have a big expectation coming out of just single meeting. It's the importance of the meeting is that this is a start of the continuation of the coming series of meetings among the three leaders. So far, this time, the three countries agreed on many things, particularly on economy and social matters. It's a common agenda for all Asian countries. Simultaneously, we should also keep in mind about the difference between the three countries, particularly in the realm of security issues and human rights issues.
Professor Lee, go to you as well. Among all of the things being discussed or being touched on by Mr. Furukawa, what do you think will be the biggest common ground? Obviously, trade could be one on top of the agenda, but how far can the three really reach? That is the question, isn't it, Professor Lee?
That's right. You know, regional integration among these countries in Northeast Asia has a very thin, patchy record compared with the long history of close cooperation and integration we see in Southeast Asia. So even the mere fact that the leaders of these three nations have gathered together and have pledged to continue these occasional meetings, I guess that has an ameliorating influence on the deep conflict, divide, due to the cloud of history that Japan casts vis-a-vis South Korea, North Korea, and China. So it's a good event in that the past year we've seen, over the past year, we've seen a nadir almost, the lowest point of bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan. So it's a good event, yes. It papers over some of the harsh tone and rhetoric that we've seen since August. President Moon saying back in August that we shall never again lose to Japan, and so on. So yes, it's a positive development, but of course we have to wait and see to see if we reach any kind of real resolution on these historical issues like forced labor.
Well, there are so many things to touch on. I'm not sure whether history will be really on the central agenda this time, but Mr. Rong, RCEP is, if you listen to the speeches by the three leaders coming from the three countries, everyone touches on RCEP. They all encourage the process to speed up, and the question is when? Mr. Rong, we have seen early rounds of discussions, latest over the past few months, but not yet reaching any agreement. People talking about next year, hopefully, and there's a big hopefully. Mr. Rong.
Well, indeed, I think the pledge and the commitment by the three leaders to accelerate the process of conclusion of RCEP, and also based on the conclusion of RCEP to accelerate the negotiations of the free trade agreement of the three countries, I think is very much positive note, even though it's been repeated many times, time and time. I would like to go back very briefly about the sort of impression or the primary takeaways of this leaders meeting. I think, yes, to some extent, I can understand the cautions of our previous, two speakers. But in the meantime, I would like to put in a bigger context. That is the past 2 decades. This is the beginning of the 3rd decade, and I see that over the past 2 decades, this mechanism, this cooperation, driven by crisis as being oriented, and with practical cooperation as a priority, but always disturbed by political differences and others. I would see, I would be a little bit optimistic that maybe looking ahead for the next decade, 10 years, we would going to see something different.
Why?
That instead of the differences dividing us.
Why?
Well, the answer lies in, of course, certainly these pledges, these commitments, but more importantly, I think the changes or the transformation that taken place at the border context, as the major country, major power rivalries are growing. As border, also I think the uncertainties and unpredictabilities of the transformation of by the technology, and a lot of, I think, issues, a lot of challenges would call upon more and coordinated, concerted efforts by the three countries. And also, I think that the the very fact that particularly economically, I think they are so much interdependent. So I think we may have we are at the verge at the time that the next decade may be different from.
Well, of course, we always want to think hopefully, but some of the things that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Rong, was also the reasoning that mentioned many times among the three countries. That's why the mechanism exists from the very beginning. So it still takes wisdom and strategies, as the three leaders also touched on in their various speeches this time, as they were having this meeting in Chengdu, Sichuan province, where, you know, the romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a very ancient classic novel coming from China, was well known in Northeast Asia. Of course, it's not about the three countries, because it was rather a period of time in China among the three small kingdoms within Chinese border, and this time we're talking about three different nations at a modern time. But still, people see wisdom and strategy certainly is the key here. Talking about wisdom, Mr. Sun, how much do you think needs to be added there in order to have at least some of the trade agreements, as mentioned by Mr. Rong? Will trade integration at a time when particularly technology is already bringing us to the next round of a global supply chain, particularly in Northeast Asia, different from the mass manufacturing that was existing between the three nations. Now it's another level. How much wisdom is there needed? Do we have them, Professor Li, rather?
Well, as your guest in the studio has mentioned, you know, trade relations and interdependence, this is a very positive glue among the three nations, and all of the nations, all three, are to each other and among themselves one of the biggest trading partners. South Korea's trade with China is bigger than South Korea's trade with the US and Japan put together, almost twice, 1.7 times or so bigger, and South Korea enjoys a big trade surplus with China, which is unusual because most of the big trading partners of China enjoy a trade deficit. So trade is certainly a cohesive glue, and this kind of interdependence and cooperation, this trend, this pattern is irreversible in my view. So that's a positive fact. At the same time, as we know, the security structure in Northeast Asia is one led by the United States, with Japan and South Korea on one side, vis-a-vis China and other countries. So that reality will always sort of stand in the way of great advances in trade relations, political relations, historical relations, and that structural reality, of course, impedes progress on even North Korea's denuclearization.
Mr. Furukawa, there has always been, to various degree, a apparent conflict. On one hand, the geopolitical and the so-called security system, as Mr. Li mentioned, is more U.S.-oriented for South Korea and Japan. However, when it comes to trade, economic integration in the region, it's very much China-related. How now, particularly at a time when you see so many very different ideas as to what the world should be like now, even between Japan and the United States, South Korea and the United States today, would that mean for the two countries, at least for Japan this time, Mr. Furukawa, on trade, for example?
Yeah, you know, between Japan and China, and also between Japan and South Korea, we have so many different geopolitical interests which are conflicting with each other. But the reality that we are not able to move to any other place, we will continue to be a neighbor with each other forever. So we have to find a way to cooperate and live together. And in the realm of national security affairs or multi-related issues, Japan, China particularly have a conflicting interest, and it is difficult to reach any meaningful agreement between two countries on security-related issues as of now. But that should not preclude our efforts to seek for cooperation and agreement on economic issues or social issues.
One
both
of the
Japan
issues,
and China is experiencing.
Yeah, Mr. Furukawa, if I could be a little bit more specific, we don't want to be talk about just abstract philosophically, because everybody knows that logic already over the past 20 years. So what's now, one of the things is whether China and Japan will have a free trade agreement. Now, earlier the two countries have rather investment agreement, bilateral, and people are looking at the two countries and see, you know, whether there's a free trade agreement, because China has that with South Korea, and Japan has that with South Korea, but not between China and Japan. So maybe there's something, a tool that both countries can grasp on if they really want to. So I think that probably is the question. You know, the logic is so much known, but the thing is, if we want to do things, what are the things, and why are we still from the end result of the things? Can we work on the whys, Mr. Furukawa?
Well, as you have just seen, the three leaders agreed to accelerate the process to conclude a free trade agreement between the three countries. There still remains pending issues, particularly the protection of intellectual property right in China is different. The system is different widely from the one instituted in Japan. This kind of detail matters, detail issues have to be resolved so that Japanese companies can safely feel safe in investing more deeply into Chinese industry, particularly in the cyber-related industry or AI-related industry.
Interesting. Mr. Rong, let me go to you just on the point that Mr. Furukawa mentioned. Whether it is IPR or other issues, we have seen the Japanese companies rather investing intensely in China rather than less. And the question really is now, if I could be a little bit bold in saying this, not whether much about learning of the technologies, but also sharing of the technologies. 5G, for example, is an area where Northeast Asian countries are spearing ahead in front of the world. South Korea, China particularly this time. In terms of IPR, in that area, 40% of the global IPR of 5G are coming from this region. So it's really amazing when it comes to real numbers and real case studies. So Mr. Rong, so what's the next stage, you know, when we think about the cooperation? How should we think about the real cooperation rather than just abstractly and also think about cooperation only from the geopolitical starting point, Mr. Rong?
Yes, that's exactly, I think, the point I would like to make. If we look at the future, the prospects of trilateral cooperation, I think instead, certainly, I think there are issues. The issues will remain, and we might have to live with them. But the important thing is that we have to look ahead for the new issues that would unite us. I think some of the issues like technological innovation and advancement, and I think even the protection of related to that, of course, the protection of intellectual property right is an issue. But if you look at what China has done in the past few years, there's a great advancement like that. But and particularly when China making, I think, the innovation as national priority. And China and Japan and South Korea, I think, can work together to jointly develop a kind of a new technology that would help the region, I mean, and the three countries and the region as a whole. And in that process, I think possibly, I think the disputes or concerns about that can be properly addressed. To some extent, I can understand our Japanese colleagues' concern about that. But behind that concern, I think I feel strongly the sense that Japan, instead, you want to hold the lead, to maintain the lead, I mean, vis-à-vis China and to some extent South Korea. I don't think it is the right way to do that. The right way is that the three countries working together and to promote and develop a more sort of advanced technology. This is actually, it is also one of the areas that the three countries work together, agree to work there.
Let's also hear from Professor Li as well, from another perspective. At the business leaders meeting today, also held in Chengdu, coincides with the political leaders meeting. There are various proposals proposed by the three sides, particularly Japanese and South Korean, shall I say, business leaders. They talk about the three countries should really now take a new look at their advantages, individually and collectively. Not as before, like 3 decades ago, when they think about mass manufacturing. Now it's about technology. So how can the three countries be able to research, develop strategies and technologies together, and also test and apply these technologies to test it in a mass market as big as China or even Northeast Asia, including the three countries together? That will be one thing that the three countries now should really urgently work on, rather than wait and delayed by all the other discussions. Professor Li, what do you make of this proposal? How fast do you think, with the wisdom of the region, that can be done? Is there something we can learn from these 3 decades ago, when the mass manufacturing labor division was, in a way, divided among the three countries? It worked very well, but not now anymore, because the countries are different now.
Well, Ms. Tian, you mentioned the romance of the three kingdoms, the first lines of which, as you
know you love history,
begin
Professor
thus:
Li.
after a period of chaos, there is unity, and after a period of unity, there is chaos. I'm sort of a glass half empty kind of guy, a bit pessimistic. But on this trend of greater economic cooperation and technology cooperation, I'm rather optimistic. It will be a slow process, but we have not addressed the big factor, the country in the region that likes to drive wedges, not only among the US, Japan, and South Korea, but also among China, Japan, and South Korea. And I think after a period of provocation, there is usually a period of placation. North Korea's history is replete with such patterns, and we are on the verge today of a major provocation that will render this kind of thrust trend toward economic cooperation more challenging, because North Korea will create problems not only for South Korea and the United States, but also for China.
I see. Mr. Furukawa, we could mention all of the issues of difficulties among the three countries. I guess that's true for any country and any countries. But the thing is, as you said, the three countries are still neighbors, and they will be forever neighbors. So the question really is, can we be able to work on something? One of the things I heard from the business leaders of the three countries today is their frustration that politics and geopolitics, as well as some of the political issues you just mentioned, are delaying their cooperation, their urgent cooperation, once and again. And they feel very frustrated about it, because they think there are a lot of things needs to be done. Otherwise, the three countries will be left behind by some other parts of the world. Mr. Furukawa, do you think politicians and those who play with geopolitics should also think carefully about that? Because after all, the future is going to be about technology and how technology is being applied in trade as well.
Well, yes, if you look at the future, bright aspect of the future, future could be determined by technology. But in reality, if you look around the world today, people around the world have strong attachment to ethnicity or history or many other issues that are not related to technology. I have to say that the economic relationship among the three countries is really important, but not stable. And I suspect that this instability, unstability of the trilateral economic relationship may continue in the future.
Okay.
Details matter, when we try to promote economic cooperation, this is not the stage to talk about the macro aspect. We need to talk about how to solve disputes among the companies, or how to tackle the forgery products. Or even the law enforcement mechanism to
all right, we're really running. We're running out of time. But I want to thank the three of you for your contribution. There are a lot of things that needs to be done, no doubt about that. There's no way that we can just sit here and talk about it without doing anything. As long as we try, there might be things that we can work it out. I hope with a hopeful note we can run the discussion to an end. Mr. Furukawa, Professor Li, Ms. Rong, thank you so much for your contribution. Really appreciate it once again. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. A Hong Kong SAR Legislative Council member talks about his mission to fight for what he thinks is right. And that interview right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. In the past 6 months, unprecedented disputes and violence have hit the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The Hong Kong SAR government said since June, the region had more than 900 demonstrations, marches, and public rallies, many of them violent. Ho Kuan-yu, a member of the Hong Kong SAR Legislative Council, has been target of a radical forces. Mr. Ho was stabbed on the campaign trail in November. He lost his seat in the local election eventually. Some people do see him as a hero, while others regard him as controversial. So what makes him controversial, and what does he believe? What do you think is the future of Hong Kong, and how is that reflected in the conversation I had with him? In a one-on-one interview with him, he sheds light on controversies hounding him as a politician, but at the same time expressed directly his hope for the future in Hong Kong. Mr. Ho, welcome to CGTN. You failed in the recent election. Tell me about your reaction to that.
Yes, I failed to gain the seat and to be re-elected last time. I was not happy, and but given all the backgrounds leading up to the election itself, everybody understood that it was quite an unusual election. There was a lot of unfairness and not equal treatment to all the candidates.
You were not happy. You were not happy about your own performance or your own result, or generally speaking, the whole election?
Well, of course, I myself would also be part of the reason. However, that was not the major reason. The thing that surrounding the district council election, well, that before it happened, we had already gone through almost half a year riotous moments, a lot of demonstrations, and even riots happened. People were attacked, including myself, when I was doing my street stations to lobby for the support. So all these were not desirable. In fact, law-breaking events happening every day, almost every day, leading up to the election day itself.
But here, in Beijing, when you were attending one of those conferences, you became a star and a hero, certainly. How do you see the different reactions coming from mainland and also from Hong Kong about you also?
Yeah, it is quite a stark difference between Hong Kong and the mainland. I guess my ordeal, which had been vividly witnessed by the viewers, my friends on the mainland, had offered me a lot of sympathy and also supports, and in fact, the situation in Hong Kong is quite the other way around. We had a very clear division in the public views, in the public opinions. Either you support or become or being patriotic or not patriotic. So the difference, the political difference, and the stance in Hong Kong is so divided. Nevertheless, as I've just said that many times before, the things happen in Hong Kong is not just a simple matter starting from internal. It was also affected by some other foreign influence and foreign factors. So I would put it in a succinct term, it is and still ongoing a color code revolution. So therefore, population in Hong Kong were clearly divided, whereas it gave quite a different opinion and a different impression on the mainland. Those who support me feel that what I've been doing was just right and correct. So therefore, it's just quite a big surprise to me that I received quite a different treatment here on the mainland, which in fact I would be very proud of, and very honored to have this sort of support from the mainland people here.
You suggested that there were others interfere in Hong Kong, but do you have real evidence for that?
Yes, we have seen some glaring evidence, and even given the recent crackdown of some sort of the illicit money by the AML, anti-money laundering, by the police, a total amount of $70 million
Hong Kong dollars or US dollars?
Were seized from an bank account. So that signifies what? For whatever color code movement or revolution, no money, no talk. So therefore, money is the essence. So where does the money come from? Either from Hong Kong locally or some foreign funding. So it is just it's part of it's tip of an iceberg. It's part of the evidence that speaks for itself. And secondly, we had also seen some other foreigners, strangers, mingling with the rioters and also the demonstrators at the streets. They were not journalists. Why were they there? And in fact, we had also seen a picture which was so clear that to show that this stranger was teaching and demonstrating to another young guy how to set fire, be an arsonist. So that was also a glaring evidence that we've seen. There are so many other traces too, but of course, if you ask me whether or not these are strong enough to support the case that it is a foreign factored, influenced color code revolution, I may not come up to the test as required as for the trial, which is usually conducted in the courtroom. However, suffice it to say, yes, there is foreign evidence, foreign factors.
You have a very clear pro-Beijing label in Hong Kong politically.
Yeah, if you put it that way, it's a pro-Beijing. In fact, I think I am a Chinese, so it's not just a pro-Beijing with that narrow definition. I'm a Chinese, a patriotic Chinese.
But on the other hand, it is also a complicated process for a political figure like you, because you're a legislative member, to work out your future plans. So how would you reconcile certain labels people give to you and your responsibility as a legislative member to look at some of the most important and fundamental issues facing Hong Kong today? How would you be able to identify clearly your personal print vis-a-vis the real big cause of Hong Kong?
I see no disagreement or
conflict
as such. Hong Kong is a SAR, Special Administrative Region, a part of China. So being patriotic is all, fitting in, actually. There's no conflict as such. But given some of the background Hong Kong that she has before the sovereignty returned to China, Hong Kong had been a British colony, so therefore there were people who had made allegiance to the Queen before. So for those who might have some difference or difficulties, well, to me, I don't have it. I don't have that sort of baggage. And secondly, when looking or dealing with the issues in Hong Kong, majority of them are relating to our daily life, the policies, you know, how to improve the living standards, how to command a greater competitiveness of Hong Kong vis-a-vis international markets. So there's no conflict as such that when one claims himself to be Chinese, and on the other hand, that declaration would hinder him in advancing all these sort of issues. No, there's no such conflict at all. But some people, well, my colleagues, some of them, they are the opposition, of the opposition party. They say that, you know, being patriotic, you are obstructing the progress of the universal suffrage. Well, again, that is a misconception. Under the basic law, universal suffrage, be it for the direct election of the chief executive or returning members, candidates to the Legislative Council, there's no such thing to say that being patriotic or being a Chinese or pro-Beijing would tantamount any difficulty or obstructions to such a progress. Everything has been promised under the basic law, so it has to be done on a gradual basis. The reason why it was stopped simply because the last term, the electoral members themselves, they voted it down. So therefore, that was the reason.
Do you blame them for that?
I don't blame them. Why should we have to? Why should I have to? Whatever the choice is the choice of Hong Kong people. And they were the representative of the Hong Kong people. I respect that. But one could not just, you know, have the cake and eat it to say that when they screw it up on the one hand and then put the blame on other people.
I see.
They were responsible for their own acts and they did it themselves in the last term. This term is the 6th term. Because the 5th term was that's the issue, the motion was put forth, and they clearly, with the conscience, to vote it down. They did it themselves.
Do you see these kinds of division ever increasing in Hong Kong? This is only one issue. There are many other issues.
Yeah, there were so many issues. In fact, some of the livelihood issues were unfortunately dragged into, well, being politicized. And I see that they were totally uncalled for. Yeah. And that's the politics in Hong Kong. But as I said, I do not see any problem when I claim myself to be patriotic, should be the person to be blamed. But, you know, that question should be put back to those, why should it be blamed?
My question for you also, you're a lawyer.
Yes.
So let me ask you about how should people, from your perspective, understand the legal structures? And now we are not here for a lecture, but rather very briefly. We have the national constitution. We also have one country, two systems. We also have rules and regulations coming from the SAR government. So now there are a mixture of legislation pieces. And there's also different views as to what to apply at what occasion. So to you, what are the priorities? How should we understand this rainbow of legislations and how do they work together?
Well, if one really wants to work out the relationship between the basic law and also the national constitution, then he should really have to sit down and study them. And the basic law just derived from the national constitution, that is for sure. So when the SAR was established, it was established in accordance with Article 31 of the national constitution, because as I've just said, you know, Hong Kong has her own historical background, and that was something that, you know, the Central People's Government respected. Yeah. So that's why when taking back the sovereignty of Hong Kong, to include it into the mainland, the CPG pay attention to it and pay respect to it. So that's why it creates the special administrative region. It is a place, administrative region with high, autonomy. Still, it is a city under the directive of the CPG, the Central People's Government. So that is already set out in Article 12 of the Basic Law.
Okay, another question. Do you enjoy being a controversial figure?
I enjoy what I am and what I'm doing. I hope that if there was really a good chance, a good choice for me to choose from, I don't think that, being controversial is good. And under these circumstances...
That's not your purpose.
That's not my purpose. The only thing is that, as you just said, people in Hong Kong had some sort of a political stance and find it not really receptive to those politicians who claim, or vividly or so clearly claiming themselves to be pro-Beijing or being Chinese or patriotic Chinese. So therefore they label these people, including me. But on the other hand, I fight for what is supposed to be correct. And I defend the position that it should be defended. So I openly and quite, outspoken on all this issue.
Finally, before we go, tell us, how would you deal with the future of Hong Kong? Let's just say, a month, a year, 5 years. Do you think things will really be different?
It will become better, but I don't have the crystal ball in my hand. I can't really predict. Nobody could have predicted, the things happen in 2019. Nevertheless, I still have the hope and be optimistic about the future. So therefore, I would just try to do whatever I could within my ability as a legislative councillor to put things right and through the legal manner, through the legal means.
Did you recover from the stabbing wound?
Fully.
Fully?
Yeah.
Is there still a mark?
A scar on my chest, just close to my heart.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ho. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Christmas Eve is here, so enjoy the holidays. Bye for now.